just talking to people. You know what I'm saying? It's conversations, and I'm good at that. I have a natural gift from God to be able to communicate with people and relate to people. And I learned so much from talking to people. The best thing that I ever learned in life is if you listen more than you speak, you'll always be able to understand somebody. And one thing that I learned is that we are much more alike than we are different. Just make that more complicated. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Live Your Purpose podcast. I'm your host, John Morgan Jr. I want to say thank you to everyone who has been supporting the podcast. It's actually funny. I've been getting a lot of texts and, just a lot of, good feedback on people watching the podcast during this quarantine time. So I really appreciate that. If anybody is, interested in looking at the podcast, episodes 2 through 8 are available on YouTube. Episodes 1 through 8 are available on all your streaming audio platforms on Apple, Spotify, and Anchor specifically. So before we get into, who our guest is, I also want to send a special shout out and prayers to, everyone being affected by COVID-19, the coronavirus, all of our essential employees, everybody who's been affected. We want to give a special, prayer and shout out and condolences to, everyone who's been affected, anyone who's lost anybody during this time. Allow us to just, send prayers and love to those people right now. And without further ado, we're going to go and, introduce who our guest is. As one of the things that I've done in starting this podcast, I've mentioned a few different times that, like, when I initially started this podcast, there were a select few people who I had in mind that I wanted to, like, sit down and have a conversation with. And this individual actually was one of those, so I'm actually really looking forward to, like, having this conversation, highlighting her and, allowing her to share her story with us. So without further ado, we have Mrs. Brandee Wilkinson. She's a mother, a wife, and a licensed funeral director, embalmer, and owner of Wilkinson's Funeral Home, the actual first Black woman to own and operate a funeral home right here in Akron, Ohio. Brandee, what's happening with you?
What's up, man? Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, no problem, man. I'm actually very, very excited. You know what I'm saying, for this. I have no idea about funeral homes. I have no idea about the business of them. But I'm very intrigued, and I'm intrigued to hear about your story, man. You know what I'm saying? So thanks for coming on, for real. I really appreciate
you, man.
So the way that I do it is, I really want to highlight your story. So, let's start at the beginning. What was childhood Brandee like? What was it like for Brandee, the little Brandee? What was it like here in this city? What can you remember when you think back of your childhood memories?
So I'm the baby. I have 2 older sisters.
Okay.
And so some say
Dad had his hands full.
Yeah. So look, some say spoiled, but I don't know. Okay. That remains to be seen. But my mother was actually the HNIC of the household.
Mm-hmm.
So she was an educator. She was a teacher. So when I was growing up, when I was at elementary at Schumacher, she was teaching there.
Okay.
And so it was cool, though, to have your mother there. But at the same time, you couldn't get away with much because everybody knew who my mom was.
Right.
But it was, I had a very good childhood, honestly. I stayed on a dead-end street on the west side. And so I was close to a lot of other kids that were on the street, and 2 of them I'm best friends with to this day. And so, we good. All was good,
Yeah. So, and part of my, like, preparation to have this conversation, I do a little bit of research on individuals. I talk to people who are close to the, to the guests a little bit.
Man, who you talk to?
I ain't gonna tell you on camera. I'll tell you when we get done. I'm gonna tell you afterwards.
All right.
But one thing that was, like, prevalent, and it was pretty, I was able to kind of get the feeling of this, is that you had a real love for music. And you were, like, a huge music lover. Tell me about, like, your experience with the fully committed youth choir.
Okay.
Youth choirs in general, like, what I'm saying? Tell me about that experience, because
in
my research, I learned that, like, the fully committed youth choir was, like, a big deal. Like I didn't know
Right.
anything about it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I grew up in the church, like for the standpoint of like, you know, we went to church and things like that, but I didn't necessarily have a church home. So I really wasn't aware of, you know, the ins and outs and things like that. So when I heard that this, you know, this youth choir was really like, you know, y'all was really the shit. So I'm
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, well, I wanna hear about this. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
what was your experience, you know, like within that youth choir, and like why music specifically? Why do you think you have such a love for music?
Man, honestly, growing up, so my mother, even though I was raised in the church, my mother was still out here kicking it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so she would have company over to the house, and I can hear they would be in the basement, and they have all the old jams just blasting through the house. I
Yeah,
wasn't allowed to go downstairs, but
right.
I could hear, the music. And so I think that's where I first fell in love with music in general, through my mother. But then as we started going to church, the church that I was going to, which was Second Baptist, we had a youth choir, and they were just, it was an older congregation. And so honestly, I was dying inside, like, man, get me out of here. And my mom wouldn't let me leave Second Baptist until I graduated high school,
Mm-hmm.
um, technically.
Mm-hmm.
But and so how did Fully Committed come about? So where was I? I was somewhere, I don't even remember, but I ran into Paula Smith.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Paula was like, um, she was like, I belong to Mount Calvary. We have this outstanding youth choir, and I would love if you could come and be a part. So, and I was like 14 at the time. And so
Mm-hmm.
I begged my mom, like, can I please go over to Mount Calvary? And so she let me, but she only let me go to Mount Calvary on youth Sundays.
Okay.
And so I still had to go to Second Baptist on all the other Sundays. But man, Fully Committed was lit. And I got so many memories, man. We just had a good time, and we sounded good. I mean, it was a good sounding choir.
Right.
And we were just all on the same page. We was, on fire for the Lord. It was just, man, it was just crazy. It was crazy.
I mentioned it. I mentioned this year. I'm like Fully Committed youth choir. I said I didn't even know Paula. You know what I'm saying? She was like, she was like, what? She was like, Paula was a big deal. Like she is a
Right.
big deal. She's known throughout the city for this youth choir. Mount Calvary had like the best youth choir in the city. That's
I
those
did.
are the words. And it's just so funny how everything kind of just works in unison because I actually met Paula 10 years ago in college at Stark
Okay.
State when I met Paula. So I didn't even know her to have this musical background.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting how it all works. Tell me, like, what do you think, like, just some of your biggest experience that you took from, that youth choir?
Um, well, so with me having two older sisters, I got a chance to have a sense of community with peers my age.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we all had the same, I don't want to say goal, but maybe likeness in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so the biggest takeaway for me, I mean, I just enjoyed, man. I had to go to every rehearsal. I had to go to everywhere that they sang, because it just made me feel a part of something. And it's something that I already love to do anyway, which was singing. And it ain't getting no better than that, man.
Yeah, yeah. And so this ultimately evolved into you being at the choir at Bookthul. Talk to me a little bit about, like, yeah, I told you I did my research. Yeah, so tell me about your experience, like, being in the choir in high school. Because again, man, it's so interesting to me to like hear these different experiences. Like when I was in school, granted, now I was an athlete, I played sports. Like
Mm-hmm.
the choir was for the lames, man. I'm not no choir, you know what I'm saying? But as
Right.
I've gotten older, I've grown like a real appreciation for not just church, but the music, the singing, just everything that kind of just falls in line
Right.
with it. And I really have an appreciation for like synchronized singing and things. So just talk to me a little bit about that experience, like being a teenager and being in the choir.
It was dope, man. I mean,
Yeah.
like I consider myself to be sort of popular at Bookville. So you didn't have to be corny to be in the choir.
Okay.
And so, I mean, we just had a good time.
Check me real quick. Check me real quick.
I wasn't no lame, nigga.
Right.
No, but it was cool. Mr. Drone, who I love to this day, he really set the foundation for the gospel choir at Bookville.
Okay.
And yeah, he laid it out, man. And I have a lot of fond memories to this day. And then even the people that I met in the choir that were doing like the music, like Brad Reeves, Brandon Scarborough, some of the musicians, Darrell Williams. I'm still close with them today. And so it was a huge impact for me because my older sisters weren't all into gospel like that. And so I can even remember one year I asked my mom for like Mississippi Mass Choir tape for Christmas. You know what I mean? And she was like, what? Who? Ain't nobody asking for that. So, just my love for music, but specifically gospel. And then I had those outlets such as Fully Committed and Bookville, man, kind of, really shaped me and my spirituality.
Yeah, for sure. That's dope. That's dope. Talk to me a little bit about like your experience as a student. And the reason I asked that question is because, like I said prior, one thing that I really try to do is highlight specifically entrepreneurs on this platform. And, in my conversation I've had with people on the platform and just outside of this, a lot of people don't always, take to the school thing. You know what I'm saying? So I'm really interested to know, like, what was your experience as a student specifically? Like, were you a student who was like, all right, I can do it, so I'm going to get it done? Or was like, man, I can't wait till this shit is over so I can go ahead and get to the next part of my life. What was your experience as a student?
So elementary, middle, I was all in. High school is sort of where I started to drift. And so I was, I mean, I don't even think, well, I know I wasn't a straight A student, that ain't my testimony.
Right.
But I managed to hang in there, and I was active at Bookville, student council and all that stuff. But really when I got to Kent is when I was like, yeah, let me hurry up and get out of here. Because that was really, college wasn't really, honestly, when I was at Bookville, I don't even know if anybody knows this. I contemplated going into the Navy because I didn't want to go to college.
Oh, yeah? Did you take the test and all of that too?
Heck no.
You contemplated, you just thought about it.
Yeah, I thought about it. And I even told my mom that I didn't want to go to school. And she was like, hey, cool. If you don't want to, that's fine.
See, that's dope because, that was like a time period. And even though I'm just a little bit younger than you, we still kind of come up in a time period where the elders, like everything was put on us to go to school, get you a good job. Like that was your path to success. So that's actually real dope. Like, you know what I'm saying? And refreshing to hear that your mother was just supportive of, whatever you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Going back just a little bit, again, in my research, what is this that I hear about this Christmas album that you recorded? Where is this Christmas album at?
Buried where it should be.
Has it ever seen the light of day?
For a minute, and then I have funeral services for it.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it's buried now.
Wait a minute. So take me through that. Like, how do you even like come to record a Christmas album? Like, who presented you with that offer? Was this something you came up with? How did you even like, come about with that?
So my favorite time of year is Christmas, and I love Christmas music. And
I hate it. I ain't gonna lie. I hate it.
Do you?
I like 3 Christmas songs. I like Donny Hathaway, This Christmas. I like Destiny's Child. I can't even think of the name of the song. And I like When Santa Claus Comes to the Ghetto by Death Row. That's it. Everything else, I'm cool on.
Man, you crazy. Yeah, I pretty much like the soulful, the white, I just love Christmas music. And so I don't even know. This was years ago, man. I think I may have went to Brandee. Like, I kind of want to sing a couple of songs.
Okay.
Either I went to Brandon or Darrell. I don't remember. Maybe Brandon. And they was all in. And
Mm-hmm.
so I did like a little EP. I did like 3 or 4 songs.
Mm-hmm.
And ain't nothing much to talk about.
Okay, all right. Well, hey, you recorded, you know what I'm saying, a real album. That's everybody can't say they got a Christmas album recorded, man. So you got that off your bucket list. You could tell
Yeah, it was really, that's really what it was.
Yeah.
Like, I just wanted to see if I had enough confidence to do it.
Yeah, you only got one life, man. Shoot your
Right.
shot. I'm not mad at that.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Because the way that I heard it was, your parents' friend was a mortician, and she always wore suits, and you had like an affinity for her wearing suits.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that is kind of like what sparked the idea into you ultimately kind of go down this path. Like, what was it about her that like really stood out to you? Like, because again, man, like I said at the beginning, like I have no idea about the funeral home business and like morticians and things. I have no idea, So like I didn't even know mortician was a business until maybe 10, 12 years, 12 years ago, you know what I'm saying? So like, tell me what it was about her that stood out to you that was like, man, she's dope. This is different.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. She would come over to my mom's house, maybe after work. I was kind of young, so, and they would sit at the dining room table, and they'd just be laughing. They'd have a couple drinks, and she would always be killing. I mean, her suits every day, and she drove a Mercedes, and I was like, what did this woman do? And she was just real put together. And I was like, I want to find out what she does. And then once I found out that she was a mortician, she has a daughter that is around the same age as me, and she would bring her. At the time, they were living in Youngstown, so she would bring her to Akron, and we would play. And I went to where she worked at the funeral home a few times, and me and her daughter would play, in the chapel and whatnot while she was doing her work. And so I think that's really where it began. Just, just off the straight fashion, for real, is what got me. And I was like, dang. And then once I found out what she did, I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And honestly, I buried that thought and started looking into other professions, and then came back to it.
So how old were you when you ended up going with her and your friend and things? How old were you?
I'm middle school.
Really?
Yeah.
And so like, did you ever have any like initial hesitation, like, oh, she work with dead people, I'm cool on that? Like, was it any of that?
Nah, I was like, I don't care what she do. I want a Mercedes and I want them suits. And that's how I was looking at it.
And you know what? Like, it's just so good that you say that, because that's the power of exposure, and you know what I'm saying, the power of influence. Like you know what I'm saying. You didn't even know what this woman did,
right?
But you knew that she, like you said, she was well put together. She was polished. She looked like she had her things in order. Man, what did she do? That's so powerful, especially for us as Black people and Black kids specifically. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I'm sure that there's somebody out there who's seeing you today and saying the exact same thing. So that's very, very powerful. What about some of your earlier, influences of entrepreneurs or just business owners outside of her? Can you kind of like speak on who they were?
Honestly, I would really have to think for a minute, because even though entrepreneurship was always the goal for me, I didn't seek looking for mentors or, and I hate that I didn't. I wish I would have. But so I really didn't fall in line watching people own their own businesses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For me, my mother was my mentor, and she was a school teacher, like I said. So whatever I fell in line to do, I just wanted to do it well.
And so, like, do you remember, like, what about with like your parents and stuff? Did you guys have any conversations about business and like, having your own things? Like, was there ever any type of conversations about that at all? Was it ever, being done at home?
No, honestly.
Yeah.
My mom, we didn't have those talks. It was more like, you can do whatever you put your mind to. It was those type of talks, but it wasn't like, hey, you need to own your stuff. We didn't have those conversations.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if because that's not where she was, you know
Mm,
what I mean? But we didn't have those. So,
yeah.
nope.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's a variety of, different reasons why, what I'm saying, you didn't have those conversations. But a big part of it, like I said earlier, is, that really wasn't those times. You know what I'm saying? We
Mhm.
talking about the 90s, like that wasn't,
Right.
a thing for, for parents to kind of like instill entrepreneurship in their kids. They was trying to
Right.
make sure that we were safe and make sure that we were
Mhm.
secure. You know what I'm saying? So going to school and getting a job was the best way to do that. Like
Right.
even for me, my mother, she worked at Chrysler,
Mhm.
having a job in the auto industry, at Chrysler, Goodyear, Firestone, those were, considered to be very good jobs. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Those, gave you a certain type of like, access to resources to where like, man, you could survive and take care of your family. So,
Right.
I have that same type of, story as well. We definitely didn't have conversations about, entrepreneurship or like business owning and things like that.
Right.
It's also similar to yours in the standpoint that like I can remember, just seeing certain people, whether I didn't realize it at the time or not, who did own their business, like, whether that be barbers, beauticians, I always
Right.
kind of seen people, taking matters into their own hand. So it was powerful, and kind of, ultimately just work this way out. God got his way of, working things out for sure.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so going forward, just a little bit. And we spoke about this prior. You ended up, having your child. You end up getting your child Journey.
Mhm.
And I love that name first off, and I'm not even sure if like what I'm saying, y'all ended up naming her that just due to some of the experience that you had. But can you just talk a little bit about the experience with having Journey, and having with your husband and everything, and just say your experience with her, because I know you had some infertility concerns and things like that. Could you please speak to that?
Yeah. So, I think I was in mortuary school,
Mm-hmm.
and I started having the conversation with one of the teachers there that she was like, well, if you want to have a family, you need to start now. And so that sort of started sticking in my mind. I'm like, wow. So, and I ended up getting married while I was in mortuary school.
Okay.
And so I was, talking to DeMarcus, and I was saying, hey, we may need to jump on a family because I'm about to be around all these toxic chemicals, embalming, going to school.
Wow.
And this teacher said, if you want to start your family, you need to start now before you start getting in too deep. So he was like, okay, cool. So, we was trying,
Mm-hmm.
having a good time, and to no avail, you know what I mean? And so when I graduated mortuary school, I moved back to Akron, and I was at one of my girlfriend's bachelorette parties, and I was having this really sharp pain on my side. And I knew something was wrong because I wasn't kicking it with him. And I'm like, something is not right because I should be kicking it right now. I wasn't feeling well.
Mm-hmm.
So the next day, which was a Sunday, I was telling DeMarcus, like, my side is killing me. He said, let's go to emergency. So I went to emergency, and ended up having a cyst on my ovary. And so apparently the cyst had grown so large that he had to remove the whole ovary before it ruptured. And so not only did he remove my ovary, but he removed my fallopian tube. So that only left me with one fallopian tube and one ovary. It was a really, really devastating experience because I was only like 24.
Yeah.
And I mean, we wasn't married a year yet, and
Mm-hmm.
so we were going through all that, and then I started seeing a fertility specialist because I'm like, one ovary, one for fallopian tube. What do I do? And so he was like, well, you could still get pregnant with just having one. And so he was like, keep trying, keep trying. So we ended up trying, and I did end up getting pregnant but this time it was in my fallopian tube. So it was a tubal pregnancy. And so they had to remove the whole tube. And so there was my only hope for getting pregnant was vitro fertilization. So we did probably maybe 4 rounds of in vitro, which is and this is over a course of maybe 2 years or so, because you got to go through all these steps before you can actually go through the process. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's, it's like $10,000 every cycle.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, thankfully Demarcus had some really good insurance at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have to pay $10,000. We may have paid $2,000 each cycle. Yeah, so we went through that process, and anyway, each time it failed, and they really did not have a reason as to why it was failing. They thought my fertility doctor had even looked up the effects of embalming fluid, and so we just don't know. Yeah. And so at that point, I was exhausted physically, emotionally, spiritually, just tapped out. Mm-hmm. And so I said, babe, what do you think about adoption? And he said, whatever you want to do. And so we went to classes to become foster parents and all that. And that's just, kudos to foster parents. That is a strenuous process, you know what I mean? Because unfortunately, the babies in the system, they get gone first. And so you have teenagers and maybe middle school kids that are left. And if I'm only 24, how am I going to raise a 13-year-old? You know what I mean? Or a 14. So it was, it was stressful trying to find an infant, because that's what we wanted, Mm-hmm. And so I was sharing with a young lady, and I was telling her our journey, and she was like, well, I'm pregnant. And this was months and months later after I had shared my story with her. She said, I'm pregnant, and I want to know if you and your husband can adopt a baby.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, Lord, is this you? Because, I didn't even ask for this. It just came out of nowhere. He knew what I had been praying about. And so we met with her. And the cool thing about this, John, is that journey, I went to all her doctor's appointments. When she was born, I was there. Demarcus cut the cord.
Wow.
So it's like she was ours, man. Right. You know what I mean? And so that was a really, really cool experience, and which we did name her Journey, because it was a journey.
Yeah.
And so we're really, really blessed to have her. And she off the hook now. She's 9 years old, but but that's my girl, and I wouldn't trade her for the world. And that has been the biggest blessing that we have ever received.
Yeah, that's dope, man. Shout out to you and DeMarcus, for that. What do you think is just like the biggest just lesson that you think you took from that? What's something like you think you guys learned, whether that be you individually, as a marriage and as a couple? What do you think that you guys and yourself, learned in that experience?
I think a few things. Maybe the first thing is that we were married for 5 years first. And so I think maybe the Lord could have been like, you guys need to figure out who you guys are and be married and enjoy you guys first, because we weren't engaged long. We were only engaged 6 months, and then we got married. Mm-hmm. And so I take that as a blessing, that maybe we needed to work on us and get to know each other, mm-hmm. and spend time as husband and wife. I also took away that sometimes God wants us to be patient, and that's a huge thing for me, because I want everything now. And so
I overstand. I said, I overstand.
Yeah. So, really just a spiritual thing for me. And that's when, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but when all this process was going, and when all this was happening, that's when I was called into ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it just has a way of working itself out, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's, and you know, the reason why I really wanted you to speak about that here is because, number one, as a man, I am I am okay with admitting that, like, you know, we have no idea, you know, just the amount of just like trials and tribulations that women really experience. And, you know, Sierra and myself, we just had our first child a few months ago, and like I've learned so much through about the birthing process, and just like, you know, just how, you know, even the pregnancy aspect of it. I've learned so much about it, you know, just kind of being a part of it, that I don't think a lot of times us as men, we don't always consider, you know, the amount of stress that women are under. You know, the amount of, you know, how the socialization aspect comes into it. Like you said, you know, you were a young woman, you know, and ultimately a lot of it had to do with your career path, but still a lot of people don't always approach men and say, hey, you got to help me have babies, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
That's an aspect that women have to deal with, that we, you know, we just don't have to, you know, experience that, you know. But I do think it's important for men to hear these stories, you know, and understand the impact, you know, understand the things that women go through. Because I'll be the first one to admit, man, men don't have shit on women. You know, women are so much more stronger than men without question. You know, I don't
Yeah.
care. I'll bet that against anybody. You know what I'm saying? When you can breastfeed a kid all day, every day, and like that kid has to stay on you, that will show you something right there. Like I love my kid to the death, but after about an hour and a half,
Right.
hey, I'll pass it along. You know what I'm saying? So I appreciate you, you know, sharing that. You know,
Of course.
I'm sure a lot of people are gonna, you know, be able to get a lot of value from that. Going back a little bit, you know, you did talk a little bit about when you were in mortuary school. How did the idea of mortuary school even come about? Again, I didn't even know mortuary school was a thing. Like, you know what I'm saying? When did that come about? When did you realize, like, you know what, I'm going to mortuary school?
Yeah. So I was at Kent. I went in for psychology. I just knew that I was going to be a psychologist. That was just my ultimate goal. I wanted my own practice. And then something shifted. I think it was because I was tired of school. And I was like, I know if I want to get my PhD, I'm gonna have to keep on going. And I just don't have it in me anymore.
Right.
And so I started thinking, what other passions do I have hidden that I could really tap into? And so the first thing I thought of was grief counseling. And so I did a little research on that, and I was like, I still kind of need to go to school a little bit longer. And then I tapped into my mom's friend. And then I said, wow, I could really, start looking up mortuary schools. And that's how it happened, man. So when I graduated Kent, I took a few months off, and then I moved to Cincinnati.
And went to mortuary school.
Yeah.
So what, explain to me, like, is it more hands-on experience? Are you guys doing lecture? Is it just like any other major that you have? Like, explain that process to me.
Yeah, it's just like any other college. You got your regular classes. I had chemistry, anatomy, biology, you know, a few other courses related to death care. And then you had lab. And lab was the time where you got to work on cadavers. And so if you already have your bachelor's degree, it's a year-long process. So I went from March to March straight, 12 months. If you don't have your bachelor's, you have to go for 2 years. And so I didn't have to stay, you know, an extra year, but it's just like regular school. You know, you get in, you go to class, and you learn, you know, you got different teachers for different subjects. And then your lab time is when you have, you know, when you do what you do.
So what is it about the process that you can enjoy? Is it actually being with the cadaver? Like, what are you doing? Like, are you like, obviously I know that y'all get them dressed and y'all get them prepared for presentation, but like, what is the process? Explain it to me.
So you mean like the process of embalming?
I don't even know what embalming is. What is that?
Okay, so embalming is like process of sanitizing the remains, disinfecting the remains. So what you do is you drain the blood and put the embalming fluid in to
Okay.
preserve the body.
Okay.
And that's the ultimate goal is preservation.
Okay.
Um, I mean, how technical you want me to get?
Go ahead, keep going. I'm really listening. I'm intrigued. Keep going.
So the process of embalming, starts like right in your clavicle, which is your collarbone.
Mm-hmm.
So you make an incision like right on your collarbone, and you search for two main vessels, which is
Yeah.
your right common carotid artery and your right jugular. And your jugular is where you drain the blood from, but your carotid artery is where you put the embalming fluid in. And that's it really. I mean, that's on the surface.
So, have you ever had any creepy moments?
Heck
Like,
yeah.
like you gotta like. Okay, time out. So, have it. Listen, it's got. Do you ever feel like, okay, this is some. It's spirits. It's like some spirits going around when you're dealing with people's physical bodies. Like, do you have spiritual experiences when you're doing this, like good or bad?
Spiritual experiences?
Yes.
No.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Nah, I mean you got to explain what you mean.
Oh, okay. So when you say you have creepy moments, what are you referring to?
Oh, I'm referring to like
Not spiritual as in like spiritual awakening, but like where you feel like you feel in the person's body that you're dealing with. You may feel their spirit in the room or something like that.
No.
That's too deep.
Yeah, I don't fool with that. Nope.
Okay. Okay.
I'm talking about like if a hand fall down and I hear, you know what I
Oh,
mean? I'm
okay.
talking about creepy like that.
Okay. Okay. So like
Um,
something's like jumping out on you. Something. Okay.
right or
Okay.
something. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what about that process did you like fall in love with?
Um, so for me, the first time I embalmed a body and uh, once we got it dressed in the casket, the family's reaction is what got me.
Mm-hmm.
And once you see that family and how pleased they are and the comments that you hear, that's for me that fueled me. And I was like, wow, I can really do this.
Okay.
And so that drive for me is really what I get from the family.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's not what I do in the embalming room. It's what comes from that.
Okay. So it's the service that you provided for the family
Right.
and for the individual.
Right.
Okay. I got you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's dope. That's dope.
Mm-hmm.
I can appreciate that. So at one point in time, you touched on this a little bit ago. You ultimately, went into ministry. How did that come about? Because like you said, you came up in the church, like you guys went to church and everything like that, but your parents weren't necessarily in ministry. Doesn't sound like. So how did that even come about for you?
So, like I said, I mean, it was different. I mean, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but because you have siblings, right? You got
Yeah.
siblings, but
Yeah.
you ever feel like you just a different child?
Absolutely.
That's how I felt. Like I knew something was about to be different about me. I didn't know what. Because even when I was younger, like I said, I would ask for Mississippi Mass concerts, or CDs, but I'm blasting rap
Mm-hmm.
still. You know what I mean? So, but I knew something was in me so much that my mom and my sisters used to tease me and call me Little Shirley Caesar. And so, and so even with all that, I put that, on the back burner. I didn't feel like I was necessarily called to the ministry, but I still felt different.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was going through this whole experience of infertility, I was just in a really, really dark place. And that's where the Lord called me, like, girl, I got so much more in store for you if
Yeah.
you just say yes.
Yeah.
And so, I said yes, man. And I went and I talked to pastor and told him that the Lord had called me. And it was my decision to ultimately go to seminary.
Yeah.
So, because I kind of, you know, my mom was big on education.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't really push it, but I knew she was strong on it. Like, if you want to be in a specific field,
Yeah,
know all
educated.
that you can about it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, I need to go to seminary. And it was so crazy, man, because when I filled out my application, you had to write like a 2 or 3 page letter of about your calling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just poured out in this letter about my struggle with infertility and blah, 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 blah. And the admissions, one of the ladies in the admissions office, when she sent my acceptance letter, she also sent me a book and said she struggled with infertility too. And wrote a nice little piece in the book on, you know, how to get through dark times when you're going through infertility. And I was like, man, this is God. I'm where I'm supposed to be. It was
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
So what do you think the biggest experience that you took from, like, you know, just being in ministry, and even how it connects to what you're doing today? What did you learn within ministry that kind of like served you the most?
Uh Man, that's a tough question. You know, that's really a tough question because I feel like everything I do is ministry centered.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I'm living a life of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything gratifies me and fulfills me because I know it's ministry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. You know, 100%. I mean, I feel like what I'm doing here is ministry. You know, I think that anytime you are serving, you're doing something, you know, out of a serving heart. That in itself is ministry. You know, a lot of time we get that we get that misconstrued, you know, and attaching ministry to church and religion specifically, and that's not necessarily the case. So I understand
Mm-hmm.
completely. Um, Being here in Akron as a kid, going to funerals as a kid, there was only two that I knew. There was Roden and there was Stewart and Calhoun. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know nothing else, but I knew about Roden and Stewart and Calhoun. I knew about the
Mm-hmm.
funeral homes. I knew what the vehicles looked like. I knew that. Like, I knew when I seen their billboards, I seen them. You
Right.
ultimately ended up having, was it an internship at Stewart and Calhoun?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that internship specifically there, you know, because again, people who are from here, they know the roots of Stewart and Calhoun. And
Right.
they've ultimately been able to, like, you know, expand to different areas and things like that. But Stewart and Calhoun is the, you know, prominent funeral, you know, home here in the area. So just talk to me a
Right.
little bit about the experience even being there.
So, yeah, when I graduated mortuary school, I reached out to them. No. So when I graduated from Kent, I knew I was going to mortuary school. So I said, well, let me get my feet wet at a funeral home before I go to school.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down to Stewart and Calhoun. I told them who I was and what I was getting ready to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they immediately took me under their wing. And I learned a great deal before I even got to mortuary school. I was the
So you were there
secretary.
before you even went to
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was, so they ended up hiring me to be the secretary. So I worked like part-time a couple days a week. And then I would go and watch them like dress bodies and whatnot. And so I had a little exposure before I left. And so when I was at mortuary school, Akron wasn't my first choice. I really kind of didn't want to come back home. But it was just the other funeral homes that I had interviewed for just didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up serving my apprenticeship at Stewart and Calhoun, and they kept me on. And I ended up being there for about 10 years.
Mm. Yeah, that's dope, man. And you know what I like? You know what I like about that story the most? You said you started as a secretary. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of power in starting, you know, at the bottom, so to speak, to ultimately to where you are now. What you think was like? Why was that experience so important? Like, being a secretary, what did you learn being a secretary that helped you, you know, to ultimately having your own today?
So When I got to mortuary school, I knew that I wanted my own funeral home. I didn't know if it was going to happen, but that was my ultimate goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went back to Stewart and Calhoun, working in the office, I still needed to know all that I needed to know if I was going to run my own one day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I don't mind answering these phones. I need to know, how to do this stuff. So
Yeah.
it was cool, and I'm grateful for the opportunity
Yeah,
that they
that's
gave.
dope. So you saying that you always knew that eventually you wanted to have and own your own.
Yes.
So the way that I heard it was you had to be pushed a little bit into business just a little bit.
I did. Yeah, I still knew. So, okay. You know how you know that you want to do something, but life happens?
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened. So I always knew that I wanted my own. But then bills came, and I'm like, I got to work. I can't afford going out on my own right now. And that's kind of where I got stuck. You know what I mean? And then people did push me. A couple of people were like, you need to just go ahead and do it. And I'm like, with what money? You know what I mean? So
now, were there any other fears or just hesitations there outside of just like, having to survive in the moment? Were there any other fears that you felt, you was experiencing?
yeah, it's a fear that I still have today, which is failure. You know what I mean? I done put all my chips on the table. And so if I fail, ain't no turning back, and the fact that I know, or I knew what I was getting into. I knew that I was opening up a funeral home in the heart of some rich, deep culture, some historical funeral homes. So, I mean, I knew all that, because I was a part of one of them. So I knew what I was getting into, but that fear is still, with me, because like you said, all people know is the others, you know what I mean? And so for me, trying to tap into getting them to come over, that's always and will probably be, something that I'm concerned about.
Right. So with that, with the culture and the history of it, what was your like initial reception like being a woman and being a Black woman in this space? Stepping out into your own. Did you get a lot of support from mentors or people who have seen you kind of come up, or just the competition? Like, what was the initial reaction when you did step out on your own and being a woman and being a Black woman in that space?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, being a woman in funeral service was tough, period, even if you weren't an owner. Because even when I left under the Calhouns, I went and worked for a white funeral home for 5 years. And even though I was sort of at the top as a funeral director, when people walk in the door, they automatically go to a man. And the man could have been somebody that wasn't even a funeral director, but they just automatically ask them a question or share their concerns. And then that person would have to turn them and redirect them to me. And so that's happened most of my career. So I've always had to sort of fight to earn my spot, per se. But as far as support, I did reach out to a couple of people just to feel them out before I kind of made it public that I was going out on my own. And only a handful of people really supported me. A lot of people said it's too expensive. You're not gonna make no money for the first couple years. You ain't got no money to open up your own. Where you getting this money from? You know what I mean? So I had to deal with all of that. And even once, it's been a year now since I've been on my own, I have maybe about 3 other funeral owners that I can call.
Yeah, that's good that you do have them to kind of seek counsel with and things like that. But that's crazy that a lot of people was just putting salt in your game, man, really trying to hold you back. But I've learned that in being an entrepreneur, that comes with the territory. You know what I'm saying? You can't escape that. And like you said this earlier about being a different child. Being an entrepreneur is kind of being that different child all the time as an adult.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
You're right.
You got a different mindset. You see things differently. Whether that's just being optimistic more, whether that's just being creative more. You know,
Right.
people always want to place their own resistance on you out of their own fear, you know, jealousy, hate, whatever the case may be, onto you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's good that you were able to like continue to push through that. Talk to me a little bit about like, you know, the business aspect of when you did start to get everything, you know, rolling, or when you initially started. Like, what is the process of the funding? Like, did you have to put up your own money? Like, is it bank funding? Do you guys own the building? Do you rent the building? Like, what is the process in that?
So what we did when I sat down, I told DeMarcus, I said, hey, I'm ready to go out on my own. And he was more than supportive and was like, okay, let's do it. So we started riding around and looking for buildings in Akron. And we were looking at churches, we were looking at all kinds of stuff. And we can't, so somebody texted me and said, hey, what about the old Joe Scott? It used to be a funeral home on Arlington. And I said, man, you're right. And so we rode past. It was not a sign in the yard or anything. So we had to dig a little deeper. And we called, and it was bank owned because it had went into foreclosure.
Okay.
And so we ended up contacting the bank, and we, you know, we got a really good deal for this building.
Yeah, they wanted to get rid of it.
Huh?
They wanted to get rid of it.
They wanted to get rid of it. Yeah, because it was already other. I mean, I had to, you know, furnish the place, but it already had like an embalming room. It had a chapel.
Oh,
like,
wow.
what you gonna do with that? So they wanted to get rid of that building.
Right.
And so it was a perfect opportunity, man. And we did have trouble getting funding because you know, we're young and we Black, to be honest. And you know, so I think we had experienced a denial with a bank that I just knew we were going to get a loan for, and that broke my heart. But I had to learn that, you know, if you don't look like certain people, you know what I mean, it's more challenging.
The right complexion for the connection.
That's right. That's right. So we kept moving, and we ended up finding another bank that was willing to work with us. And we, you know, we had to grind, man. I still worked, even though I was trying to go out on my own. I was still working. And so I put my business plan together, man. I spent days up to like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning trying to put this business plan together. And then, you know, we had to put down 10 or 20%.
Oh, wow.
Which was, you know, it was a nice hunk of change.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, and by the grace of God, we came up with it. And so,
what did you learn about yourself in that process of going through all that and having to like do your due diligence, do your work, go through these different channels? What did you learn about yourself in that process?
I learned something that my mother and my grandmother always told me. If Brandee wants it, she gonna get it. And so that's what I really learned. I've always heard them say that when I was younger. But that's really what I learned. I didn't take no for an answer. And this one bank, okay, you denied me. Okay, you denied me. We're gonna keep going and see what we can come up with.
So again, I have no real formal education outside of the stuff that you're telling me now about the funeral business. Is it a profitable business? Obviously, I can think back of the lady you was talking about who was driving the Benzes, who was super booty. You know what I'm saying? Is it a profitable business? I would think that it's a business that people can ultimately scale too, because one thing that's never going to stop happening is people going to always pass away.
Right. So the thing that, first of all, I'm in my first year, and so me personally, I ain't making no money. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just gonna be all the way 100.
Right.
But it can be profitable because it's, you know, it's all about how you you structure your pricing. And so the way I structured my pricing is that I'm fairly inexpensive. And so that leaves room for you to make a profit.
Right.
But you know what I've learned is that the minute you think you got a profit, somebody about to come and get that money. So it is a very profitable business, and although people are dying and will continue to die, how they choose to have a funeral is what matters for your business. Because if you're just doing nothing but direct cremations, then you really not gonna make no money.
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of like the toss up.
So the money is really being made in the actual, like, the presentation of the funeral itself, and your more traditional funerals and ceremonies where you have people come in and things like that. That's where like the business at the real money making aspect of it comes in.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah. So like the more you do, the bigger your funeral is,
right?
The more that person can profit, and it's really hard to say profit, but it is what it is. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. What are the misconceptions, of running a business and running a funeral home specifically? Like, what are the misconceptions? Because again, in the entrepreneur space, and I would still consider myself to be a new entrepreneur, even in real estate and even in this podcast, I still would consider myself to be new. Like, I've only been on this journey for real, maybe like the last 5 or 6 years, consistently. So I could still consider myself new. And I know that being an entrepreneur is so romanticized. It's so like, it's this buzzword that everybody thinks comes with the glitz and the glamour. But it's a real grind behind this. So like, what's some of the misconceptions that you want to kind of like dispel with, number one, running a business, and number two, specifically as it relates to like the funeral home? Like, what are the misconceptions that you can speak of?
Well, I think the first one, like we just talked about, is that people think that entrepreneurs got money, and that's far from the truth.
Right.
And honestly, if I didn't have a working husband, I would certainly be struggling. And so that's really one of the biggest misconceptions. You know what I mean? Prayerfully, my business will grow to where I can soon profit and make my own, money. But another misconception would be, and this is, rightfully so, this is people's experiences, is that funeral directors are crooks. And I'm sure that there are some out there, you know what I mean? Not everybody is like that. My passion and my purpose is to serve, and I need to survive as well. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's a misconception. Not every funeral director is a crook.
Yeah.
Another one would be that we're not friendly. We're very cold, or we're weird. I may be weird. I don't know, but I'm friendly.
We all weird to somebody.
Yeah, right. So that's really it, man.
How did it feel to hit that 1 year of business?
And it felt great, and it was sad at the same time because we're in this quarantine and I couldn't celebrate like I wanted to. Right. But the way I had put my business plan together, I had put that I wanted to serve 4 families a month. And that would have put me at like close to 40 or something like that for a year. And I met that goal. And so for me, that was, I'm the new kid on the block. And I did, in my opinion, well for my first year. So it felt good, man.
Good for you. Good for you. So what's been we talked a little bit about this, before we started, but like, what's been the impact this virus and how it's had an effect on your business? And have you had to like lay off any employees and things like that? Because you guys are still in business going no matter what. And unfortunately, we're dealing with a virus that's ultimately taking people's lives, So what's kind of like been the effect and the impact on your business in this time?
On my business personally, I haven't had a huge impact because none of the families that I served since we've been experiencing this pandemic, I haven't had a deceased person that had the virus.
Okay, good.
And so I'm really thankful for that, although I'm willing to serve anybody. I've heard that there are some funeral homes in New York that's turning away COVID. Yeah, which is crazy.
That's right.
Yeah, but I haven't, and so we've had to the Ohio Funeral Directors Association. They keep us up to date on the protocol that we need to follow, which is um, they want us to wear masks now,
Yeah,
which I haven't been at work because I'm talking, and I kind of it's so hard to do that in this business because a mask is so cold. You know what I mean? It shuts you off from all emotion.
yeah,
Um, but the people that have been coming in these doors are masked up, like they ain't playing.
yeah.
And I appreciate that about our community because I see a lot of Black folks like out at the grocery stores and whatnot still not wearing masks.
Right.
And so I'm like, what's going on? But when the families and friends of people that have been coming in here, they've had their stuff together.
Yeah, I seen you had posted on Instagram like last week, like what's up with people not wearing these masks? They not taking this thing serious or what? And for me,
Yeah,
I feel you 100%. I was in the grocery store yesterday, um, and it's actually kind of funny because like yesterday was like the first day when I was like, you know what, I'm ready for this to be over with. Like
right,
I did not like walking around in public with the mask, and I see like 98% of the people are in there with masks. If you are
mm-hmm,
in any type of public space with no mask on right now, you look like the oddball. Everybody
right,
looks at you crazy right now. You know what I'm saying? You
right.
sticking out like a sore thumb. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I definitely can feel you on that. Talk to me about your goals that you see for your business and just goals that you see for yourself, just kind of going forward.
Uh, Man, I mean, it's so hard to talk about what your goals are when you're in this industry because you don't want to come off as you want to thrive off of someone dying.
Got you.
You know what I mean?
Got you.
But if I just gotta keep it all the way real,
Hmm.
eventually I want to be the Stewart and Calhoun.
Hmm.
No, I want our kids to be like, oh yeah, Wilkinson, that was it. That was the funeral home, you know.
Right.
So
Right.
that is my ultimate goal,
Yeah.
to take over the city. Real
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's like my granddad always tell me. He said, Johnny, he said you can't leave here if you don't ever come here. You know what I'm saying? It don't work that way. You know
That's
what I'm saying?
right.
The only thing that we guarantee in this world is transition. It is death. So that's just part of it. And everything has a business to it. That's just we live in America. We live in a capitalistic society.
Yeah, that's
That
right.
is what it is. And if you're able to serve and provide that process for people to be have a little bit easier grieving process, then so be it.
Right.
Talk to me about the importance of legacy, for you and DeMarcus and with Journey specifically. Like, you are the entrepreneur that she is seeing at 9 years old. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
How important is it for you, being a woman, being a Black woman, for her to see you not just owning your business, you stepping out on your own, you doing things that are like, that the people said that you couldn't do. Again, you're the first Black woman to do that here in this city. That's a major accomplishment. Like, you know what I'm saying? I
Hmm.
don't even know if she really understands the impact of that. But how important is that to you for you?
Man, it's so dope. It's so dope because when I hear her talking to other people,
Hmm.
she'd be like, I'm the princess of the funeral home. And I'd be like, yeah, girl, you are. You know what I mean? Like, it's so dope because she understands that, she saw those sleepless nights. She saw those, or she heard those conversations on the phone with the banks. I mean, she's 9, but she's pretty bright. So she understood, what it took for me to get here.
Hmm.
And it's really important because even something as simple as, when I had my billboard on the corner of Arlington and Lovers Lane, I didn't even tell her. We just got in the car and I drove past it. And to see her face light up, it just warmed my heart, man. I'm like, man, so just to have, and you'll experience those moments
Hmm.
where you know that your child is proud of you. And
Yeah.
that just and so my goal is to, even if Journey don't want to be a funeral director, which I don't think she will,
Hmm.
I want her to know that she can do whatever she wants,
Right.
and she can own her stuff.
Yeah. And that's
So
dope. You ultimately passing down, what your mom instilled in you. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
She can do whatever you want. You can own it. Whatever you want to do, sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like, some of the most important things that we can continue to instill in our children. I know for myself and Sierra, we want to instill not just ownership and business and entrepreneurship and things like that. But really knowing who he is and understand he is powerful beyond his means. Despite what the world may say,
Right.
he's going to be a black boy and ultimately a black man one day. There's going to be a lot of forces that are going to tell him who he is. But it's important for us to instill who he is at an early age. So when those times come, he can just keep working, man, and face that adversity and
That's
ultimately
right.
do whatever it is that he wants to do. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's dope. Brandee, thank you so much.
Oh man,
You know
my
what I'm saying?
pleasure.
You survived. See, it wasn't that bad, was it? Listen, I appreciate you coming on. I'm gonna definitely make sure in my will that when I die, make sure I'm buried at Wilkinson's funeral home with, you know what I'm saying? Hey, ain't no question, ain't no mystery. We going that route. So I want to just say thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you sharing your story. I'm sure people are gonna really be able to get a lot of value from the things you said on this podcast today. So before we get out of here, I have like a few rapid questions that I ask all the guests before we go. Cool?
Yeah, I peeped your other ones. I know what's about to happen.
You are okay.
I've been watching. Yeah.
All right, bet. So the first question is, what are your intentions for 2020?
Oh, I don't think I heard that question.
See,
Threw
yeah,
me for a spin. Okay.
yeah. Look at you.
Oh wait, I did hear that. Yeah. What are my intentions?
Mhm.
My intentions for this year, what has to be intentional, be
Okay.
intentional in whatever I choose to do. Intentional and consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Consistency is big for me because I want to be able to start and not only start something but finish it all the way through.
Dope. What is your purpose and how is that connecting to what you're doing today?
I believe that my purpose is to serve,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever that looks like, whether it's in the funeral industry, if it's in ministry, or if it's being a wife and a mother, that is my purpose to be a servant.
Dope. What about what is it about you that people will be surprised to know?
I think people would be surprised to know that I'm really shy. Yeah, people would be surprised. I am, I like to, have fun and stuff, and I'm kind of outgoing, but I do have that little shy, sensitive spot that, a lot of people probably don't know.
Didn't your birthday just pass?
It did.
So you a Taurus?
I am.
Oh yeah, Taurus is just a little sensitive. Y'all stubborn and kind of hard, but y'all a little sensitive. There's nothing wrong with it though. It's all happy belated, by the way.
Thanks, man.
What scares you?
Oof, man. That's a tough question. Um, Losing my purpose.
Okay, so not serving.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, okay. What is your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is but a single winged bird who cannot fly. That's Langston Hughes.
Okay, all right. First time Langston Hughes got quoted on this floor. We coming up, yeah. All right, cool. That's what's up. What is the best advice that you ever received?
I think the best advice that I received was something as simple as the golden rule: treat others how you want to be treated. That's the best advice.
Yeah, that can take you everywhere. That can take you very far.
Yeah.
So I like that. If you could pick up the phone and call your 20-year-old self, knowing what you know today, what would you tell yourself?
Ooh. If I could pick up the phone and call my 20-year-old self, And tell her what?
Knowing what you know today, what would you tell her?
Slow down.
Hey, whatever that means, we gonna roll with it.
Yep, slow down.
Would you listen?
No.
That's the funny part about telling ourselves stuff like that when we young. We wouldn't listen no way. You know,
Right.
you had to go through it. So it is.
That's right.
Give everybody, your social media tags. Give them the funeral home information and things like that. How people can get in contact with you. What you have coming up. Give everybody all that type of information.
Oh, okay. I'm on Facebook, Brandee Wilkinson. I'm on Instagram, Brandee 1908. My funeral home is Wilkinson Funeral on Instagram and Wilkinson Funeral Home on Facebook. We are currently putting together a pandemic package. Okay. And I know it sounds crazy, but this is just the time we're in right now. Mm-hmm. And so we're currently putting something together where families can see what services they can have during this pandemic and the price that they have to pay for it and everything that the package offers. We are going to have a grand opening once we are out of this. We're going to have a barbecue, like a little community celebration. And that's really it, man.
Good. Listen, I got a question I want to ask you that I forgot to ask you. Give me your top 3 values that you think an entrepreneur should have.
Ooh. Gotta be man. Gotta be honest with the folks. Gotta be trustworthy. You have to you gotta be about your word. You can't say one thing and do another.
Right.
And man, that's a tough one because I got like 50 of them. I mean, yeah. But the main thing is that people have to trust, respect you, and know that you're gonna keep your word.
Yeah. That's good though. That again, that goes a long way. Having integrity. And being impeccable with your word, So I appreciate you doing that. Thank you again for coming out. I really appreciate it. The one last thing that I have my guests do, I am like a podcast junkie. And one of my inspirations for starting this podcast is an ex-NFL player. His name was Arian Foster. When he retired from the NFL, he ended up going into music, and he ends up having his own podcast called the Now What Podcast. And one thing that he would do at the end of his show is he would ask his guests to lobby for Jim Carrey to come on his show. Jim Carrey, I guess, is one of his most interesting people. He wanted to sit down and have a conversation with Jim Carrey. So my way of kind of just showing homage to Arian, and showing my appreciation for what he put out there. I have my guests lobby for Arian Foster to come on to the show. We're going to put that good energy and manifest it. You know what I'm saying? We're going to get him on the show one day. So if you could, look in your camera right now and tell Arian Foster why he should be on the Live Your Purpose podcast.
All right, Arian, you should be on the Live Your Purpose podcast because this is a new and upcoming podcast. It's dope. John Morgan is a dope individual that respects what you're doing, and you just need to get on. Is he on Instagram?
Yeah, he on Instagram.
Yeah, I'm about to friend you right now, man. I'm about to blow you up.
Yeah, that's what's up. I appreciate it. Brandee, again, thank you so much. Much blessings to you as you continue to, thrive in your business. I want to see you, continue to grow and become that staple here in the city. I support you as always in anything, in any type of ministry that you in. I'm going to continue to support you. You are a great leader. And I just appreciate what you've done. So I want to say thank you for that.
Man. I appreciate you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for coming out. That's it. Another episode, Live Your Purpose podcast. We out.
Peace.